Hello, everyone. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite. It's great to have everyone here today. So we have an Ask the Expert session today with PowerShell Unplugged. We have an amazing lineup for you. I'd like everyone to welcome Jeffrey Snover, Jason Helmick, Sydney Smith, Danny Martins, Justin Grote, Mike Kanakos, and we're missing Jeff Hicks, but we're hoping he'll be here soon. So I'm going to let the team introduce themselves.
You're up, Jeffrey.
Hey.
Come on, Jeffrey, you're first.
Howdy, I'm Jeffrey Snover. I'm a Microsoft Technical Fellow, and I've been working on PowerShell for a while.
Yes, you have. I'm Jason Helmick, a program manager on the PowerShell team. I've been working on it for a little bit.
Guess I can go next. I'm Steve Lee. I'm the engineer manager for the PowerShell team, PowerShell and OpenSSH.
I'm Sydney Smith, and I'm a program manager on the PowerShell team as well.
I'm Danny Martins. I'm one of the other PMs on the PowerShell team, and I'm responsible for Azure Cloud Shell and OpenSSH. And I don't know who we want to pass it to now, maybe Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Grote. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a data center solutions architect. Been using PowerShell day in, day out since the Exchange 2007 days. Love to contribute to the community and very happy to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Kanakis, and that picture that you saw in the slide is definitely not me, but this is the actual Mike Kanakis. I'm a Microsoft MVP and leader of the Research Triangle PowerShell user group, and been using PowerShell for some time and love to share with the community. Thank you for having me here today.
All right, all. You guys ready to get started?
Let's
sure.
do it.
All right, so the first thing I want to bring up, and we have tons of questions from the community. Let's talk a little bit about PowerShell 7.2. You have 30 seconds. What's new and what's the new improved experience in 7.2? Someone, Jason, go.
Yeah, Jeffrey, what can PowerShell do?
Yeah,
That's what we really want to know.
everything.
No, yeah, everything. And actually, I'm going to hand this over to Steve in just a second, but 7.2 is our long-term service release, 3 years of support on that, and we are so close. We are very close, just a few days away. I would say watch next week for an announcement about 7.2, but that's going to have all of the goodness that everybody's expecting, plus all, and don't forget to check out all of the modules that we've been working on as well with PowerShell 7.2, like secret management and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I'll just give a very quick, as Jason mentioned, we are very close to hitting general availability of 7.2. I do have a blog post prepped that will cover what's new and things that you should know. So I won't spoil that for now. It will also take too much time. But as Jason also mentioned, 7.2 is only one of the things that the team has done. We're still continuing working like PowerShell Get V3. We made improvements in secret management, a whole bunch of other things. Do we want to?
Awesome. So question from the community, what problems does PowerShell actually solve? What audience is really helped by PowerShell? Mike, I want to pick on you to answer this one.
Well, I would say that PowerShell just lets me and others do things faster, better, and easier, right? So PowerShell fills in the gaps where the GUI falls off because you can't design a GUI that does everything. So PowerShell allows you access to data and resources that is just not available in the GUI, and allows you to manipulate data and take data from disparate sources and use them together, right? So it's really an open-ended question. It's really about what can't you do with PowerShell these days, right? There's pretty much a PowerShell module for everything. But I would say what I'm seeing in the community and in the corporate world is requests to automate data more and more. And that's just something you can't do in a GUI interface. So PowerShell is really your gateway to automation and eliminating redundant tasks. So that's the way I would sum that up.
Yeah, can I say the way I think about it is PowerShell doesn't solve any problem. If it did, we wouldn't need you. You solve the problem. PowerShell helps you. Yeah. And what we try and do is provide the world, the world's always messy, right? It's messy because it's incoherent in the past, it's still incoherent, and then people keep innovating, so it's incoherence all over. And so our goal to help you solve the problem is to try and bring some semblance of order to that world so that you can manipulate everything in a reasonably coherent and uniform way.
Good answers. Anyone else? Cool. Next question. When using PowerShell with like platform specific commands, there's some issues with using like Docker and kubectl. Jason, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So first of all, those of you that work with console commands, I mean, we all work with console commands, right? They work great in PowerShell as is, but one of the challenges with those console commands is that the data that you're getting on the screen is string based and you can't grab it easily in a pipeline. If you're a PowerShell user, you've come accustomed to commandlets that are named with verb nouns, so you know what they're going to do. You've come accustomed to consistent parameter naming and object-based output that you can manipulate with the pipeline. So what we're doing with PowerShell 7.2 and one of the modules that we've been developing called PowerShell Crescendo is to make it so that you can, in a declarative way, easily wrap those console commands and basically get commandlets and everything that you would expect from a commandlet, and it all happens for you automatically. So PowerShell Crescendo is a way for a lot of people to improve their automation around those console commands.
Yeah, but can I unwind what you said? You said it was coupled with 7.2.
Oh, it's a swim lane of innovation is what it is. And it with 7.2, this is one of the PowerShell Crescendo is one of those modules that we've been working on along with PowerShell 7.2 that'll ship shortly thereafter 7.2 ships.
But what version? It'll produce commandlets, but then what versions of PowerShell will those commandlets run on?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Jeffrey. So here's the best part. We wrote Crescendo so that you author it in PowerShell 7.2. In other words, you decide what you want to wrap in PowerShell 7.2, but when Crescendo builds it for you, what it builds is just a regular, ordinary PowerShell module. I say it like it's boring, but it's not. It's pretty cool. It's a PowerShell module that runs on PowerShell 7.2, of course, but it runs all the way down level to Windows PowerShell 5.1. So when you do this and you want this automation, you'll be able to deploy these modules out to your network and get that functionality all the way down to Windows PowerShell 5.1. That's pretty cool.
And off the back of that, Jason, and anyone else can answer this, there's a couple questions that I saw from the audience. One is, how can someone download 7.2? And I think this is important to point out the repo that PowerShell maintains, but also how do people want to create modules for something that might not have a module exist for it?
Steve,
that's a great question. That's Steve, yeah.
Okay, so it seems like there's a multi-part question, so I'll try to answer it. So in terms of getting 7.2, we've actually published it in a lot of places trying to make it easier for folks to get it, whether they're on Windows or non-Windows. So we do have it on like the packages microsoft.com for the Linux users. We have it on Homebrew for the Mac users. You can always get it off our GitHub repo. For Windows, we publish it to the store. We have MSI packages. We also integrate with Microsoft Update now. Trying to think, we have WinGet support. Basically, we try to put it everywhere that is reasonable that people want to get it from. As far as modules, that's a whole other discussion. That we have a whole PowerShell gallery thing. I think that would take up too much time to answer that right now.
And Steve, I'd like to go ahead and add too that just specifically for 7.2 to make note that the release candidate is out now. The actual 7.2 RTM is not out yet, but that should be very, very soon. Keep an eye at .NET Conf pretty much because PowerShell follows the .NET kind of life cycle and reschedule. So if there's going to be a new .NET release like there's next week, might be a good idea to anticipate a new PowerShell release.
And what's the new PowerShell ISE equivalent in 7.2, or is there one?
So I can.
Oh, go Sydney, go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take this one. So currently where we're invested in the PowerShell editing experience is really in Visual Studio Code, which is a great editor. It's free, open source, cross-platform, and it has an extensible marketplace where we currently have a PowerShell extension and a PowerShell preview extension. So if you are familiar with the ISC, in our PowerShell extension on VS Code, we have what's called ISC mode. And this is going to give you a very similar visual experience with a lot of the same shortcuts you might be used to with the ISC. We also have a number of docs kind of helping folks make the conversion, and there's tons of great community resources. And I will also mention that Visual Studio Code works great with PowerShell 7.2. It also is backwards compatible back to Windows PowerShell 5.1. And we have been really invested in the reliability and stability of the extension as of late. So if you tried it a while ago and ran into some issues, I would really encourage you to give it another try. We just released a year's worth of re-architecture work into our preview last week, and that should be coming to stable extension soon.
And if I could just jump in with what Sydney was saying, I hear this from a lot of people all the time that they love the ISE. Well, I love the ISE too. It's a great tool, but it's very singularly focused. And most folks in IT today have to be able to deal with more than just writing a PowerShell script. Maybe they're putting that up on GitHub. Maybe they're remotely connecting and debugging, and they're doing a lot of different things that VS Code does really, really well. And where the ISE just wasn't designed to do those things. So VS Code is where we're going, and it's where you really want to be to experience most of the features that you can get with PowerShell 7.2.
And we had a really good question from the community from Richard, actually asking Justin about the PowerShell extension pack for VS Code and how it could help PowerShell users. Could you expand on that, Justin?
Sure. So, you get into the idea like Steve was talking about, like how do you contribute to the community? So there is the PowerShell module, which is made by the PowerShell team. It's developed open source on GitHub, but there's also all these other great modules because Visual Studio Code is this wonderful platform where if you want to write in PowerShell, you want to write in Go, you want to write in C#, you can do it all without having to relearn everything. There's a lot of other extensions that people make that aren't necessarily for PowerShell, but are helpful. Like there's a bracket pair colorizer extension that draws these nice little lines between brackets. All those kinds of things that are really helpful. And so what I did was I made an extension that's like a meta extension, which has actually turned out was really easy to make. The VS Code team had some documentation on the page. And if you go to VS Code and you go to extensions, if you just search for PowerShell extension pack, you'll see this package of things that includes not just the PowerShell extension, but all kinds of additional extensions that are helpful for developing PowerShell. Stuff for JSON, stuff for YAML, stuff for formatting. It's really nice. And you can select individual things. But again, that's just something that I made, I put out there, and you can do the same thing.
So cool.
Awesome. Well, open source seems to be the theme of all this, right? Contribution, getting the community involved. Because of the open source capability of PowerShell, we've really seen an embracement of people in the community, especially on like the Linux and the actual Linux folk really embrace PowerShell. How has that affected you all as a team? What do you see the positive in the community being and the feedback?
That's a great question. I would say that Steve probably has a great assessment of this as well. The fact that PowerShell is cross-platform has been a huge benefit for all of us. Those of us that work with more than Windows, we now have a tool that we know how to use wherever we go with whatever problems we're trying to solve. So the way that I look at it is that PowerShell becoming cross-platform just enabled us to solve problems faster and better on a lot of different platforms. Now, if you're a Linux person, you already have great tools that you're accustomed to and used to. But if you're a Linux person that also wants to do some management on Windows, you might just find that not only PowerShell helps you with Windows, but you might like the PowerShell experience on Linux too. So it works both ways.
Yeah, if I just add one small thing, I think something that people don't realize, even if you're solely a Windows only user, you do get value from our investments on Linux and macOS. Like we've learned a lot of stuff in terms of making a better shell, a better scripting language, all that. We bring it back and Windows users get it. Also, as the ecosystem grows with Linux and macOS users, you also see some of that value come back to Windows as well. So.
Yep.
Cool. I'm going to pick on Danny a little bit because Danny's been awfully quiet over there.
Sure.
Danny, I have two questions for you, but the first one's going to be about version 7.2. When's that going to be available in Cloud Shell?
Yeah, so we update the Cloud Shell image usually about every 2 to 3 weeks. And so the first rollout of Cloud Shell after the GA release will have 7.2 as default for Cloud Shell. What we also do for all the RC releases is we ship it side by side as well, though. And so if you go into Cloud Shell, you can see the current version that we have as default of PowerShell there. But we also ship the 7.2 RC release side by side with Cloud Shell. So that's available now.
Awesome. We had a question, and I'm trying to find it. Forgive me. There's a question about inconsistent commandlets, and I'm just trying to dig it out. Danny, did you see that question potentially?
Yeah. So there's a lot around kind of inconsistent commandlets for a lot of the partner teams with Microsoft, whether that be Microsoft Teams or whether that be AAD or M365, things like that. And so our team doesn't specifically own any of those commandlets, but we certainly partner with those teams to work on and improve those commandlets. And so what our team's actually in the process of doing is this new thing called PowerShell Search and Rescue, where we go out and find these other teams that might have PowerShell experiences and say, hey, how can we help you improve your modules for your customers and get to a more consistent, uniform approach kind of across Microsoft wide? But really what's, I'd say, the most valuable thing that we can do is actually have you take that piece of feedback and go to those individual team owners and say, hey, like I'll just pick on Microsoft Teams, for example. Just say, hey, teams, wouldn't it be great if the PowerShell module did X, Y, and Z, or if the PowerShell module supported X, Y, and Z? Then that's going to ring a lot louder for the Teams team than if we go to Teams and say, hey, you should do this, right? They value your feedback, I'd say, most of all. So certainly make sure you're making your voices heard with those individual area owners. So when we go talk to them, they know you're already asking for it.
Yeah, can I underscore that, right? I think I've said it a number of times at Microsoft, everybody's got 10 jobs and their true job is to figure out which 9 they can screw up and not get fired. So when we knock on their door and we say, hey, your PowerShell is not so good, they're looking at that saying, well, you know, I don't know. If I haven't heard that from my customers, then you're just one of the 9 things I can ignore and not get fired. So you really need to talk to the teams that own the PowerShell commandlets and let them know. And then we can come along afterwards and then say, hey, we can help you. But if they haven't heard from the customers that it's a problem, then us telling them it's a problem, they're like, yeah, I got other things to do.
So just to follow up on that for a second, I happened to be talking with Jason last week, and Jason had said to me, Mike, what are you hearing in the community? What kinds of things can we work on in the modules? What have you heard people talking about? And exactly to the point that Jeffrey and Danny were just talking about. And that's one of the things about what makes PowerShell great is this sense of community. And I would just implore people, especially with this pandemic that we've been going through for so long, people have been holed up and doing virtual meetings. Your voice is needed more than ever in the community right now. There's plenty of ways for you to make an impact. You don't have to be a speaker. You can put an issue in the Microsoft repo. You can participate in online forums, help people answer questions. You can show up to a user group like I run, where Justin has been at, and help with presentations or just attend. You can write blog posts. There's plenty of ways to participate in this community, but what makes this product grow over time is the community involvement. So there's plenty of ways, and more than ever, we need community involvement to get back to where we were before this pandemic.
Yeah, can I underscore 100% on that? And even if it's just reaching out to somebody and saying thank you. You know, I'm using your code, I used your example, thank you. I think the society needs that a lot right now. A lot more positivity and connection. So Mike's spot on.
Awesome. And I think the feedback thing is massive at Microsoft in all aspects, not just PowerShell. Someone brought up an issue with Teams and authentication, and same thing, like give the feedback to the teams. We have a question from the community. Working with many customers who have invested over the years in Windows PowerShell scripts, what would you say are the main breaking changes when moving to 7.x?
I guess I can cover some of this and other people can chime in. And there's a lot of detail I'm going to try to avoid because, you know, the big difference between 5.1 and 7 is really .NET Framework versus .NET. And that itself has a lot of breaking changes. Like they left a lot of stuff behind that is not going to be cross-platform compatible, which also means that there are going to be some modules in Windows that are not what we call natively compatible, meaning it can be loaded in PowerShell 7. So one of the features we have in PowerShell 7 is this Windows compatibility layer. So if we know that it's not compatible inbox, we'll automatically load it within Windows PowerShell, and we use basically remoting to make it work. And for most scripts, it should not have any effect. But there are other cases that we're aware of, and we're working with those teams where they're relying on .NET Framework features that aren't available in .NET. And there's some work they'll have to do on their part. But I think we achieve pretty high compatibility overall.
Yeah, and everybody should keep in mind that PowerShell 7.2 will run side by side with Windows PowerShell 5.1, giving you a great testing environment so you can pre-test this. A lot of people find in a lot of situations that their scripts don't require any modifications, but if you are in particularly drilling down into the .NET framework, yeah, there's going to be some changes there. But I think you'll find the compatibility between them just stellar. But try it side by side so that you can make sure.
Yeah,
Let me add one more thing. I want to add one more thing real quick, Jeffrey. We do have compatibility rules built to use PowerShell Script Analyzer, so that if you have an old script, it will highlight explicit decisions we've made that broke compatibility, or if you have like APIs or if commands are not available. So do check that out.
I was going to say, when .NET Core first came out, they were overly courageous and had refactored things too radically. And honestly, there's like only 2 teams in the world that succeeded with it, and the PowerShell team was one. So hats off. That team just did so much hard work to succeed with that. But since then, the .NET Core team has been really doing a great job bringing in more things, and it's really quite compatible these days. So, still you'll find some cases, but it's pretty great right now.
So we have a couple minutes left. I want to hit one more question fairly quickly, and then I want to hit another topic and then a segue into something else. Because we have lots to talk about, and I know we're out of time, but we have a plan for this, don't we, guys? Question is, in a lot of the Microsoft documentation, we highlight the Azure CLI and examples of ways to do things in Azure, but not in PowerShell, i.e. transfer Azure subscriptions. Thoughts, comments, questions, why PowerShell isn't highlighted enough in our documentation?
So one thing I'd like to point.
Justin Miguel.
Yeah, sorry, that was my bad. So one thing that I see when I go through these is, especially with the documentation, is that, yeah, there's different teams that have different examples on there, and sometimes, they don't have like the full details. Like you saw this a lot in the early days of like Azure Functions and such, is that they had details for all the different bindings and such, but they were for different languages. You kind of had to figure it out for PowerShell. Well, again, one of the great things about our new Microsoft, as I like to call them, is like all the Microsoft docs are on GitHub, and all the time you'll see examples out there where there's PowerShell examples. If you go into the commit history, you'll see I submitted the PR for that. I don't work for Microsoft. I'm just another person out there who just wanted to be the change I want to see in the world. And anywhere that there was an example would be that there was a place where there was an Azure CLI example, and I was like, hey, could you also show the PowerShell example? And I wrote it up, I made a PR, I submitted it to GitHub, and it got accepted. Now, if you go to that page, you see the example that I made right next to it. And I think the more and more you do that, it's just the same thing with the third-party modules, is that if you demonstrate that there's a need for the support, that's going to carry through. And they're going to say, hey, we're getting all these PRs for PowerShell stuff. Maybe we should be in that team. Maybe we should just be generating these examples out the gate.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said for more voices that speak up, right? The team's picked up on that. We're running out of time, and we know that we have a very, very important birthday coming. PowerShell is turning 15. Now, we have tons of questions for Jeffrey and Jeffrey and Steve, how it all got started, about the development of PowerShell, and we have a ton more questions from you as the community. So we are going to host an after party for everyone. Everyone's welcome to join. I'm going to put the link in the conversation now. We're going to start that in about 15 minutes, and we're going to ask Jeffrey and Steve, what was it like creating PowerShell, and we're going to ask them lots of questions, and all these questions that didn't get answered here, I want you guys to take over to the after party, and we're going to chime in and get everyone together and hopefully get more answers to your questions. So anyone have any parting words for everyone that's attending?
Come, and we would love to share more.
Cool.
Come, we'd love to share more. I have some links with some great community resources that we didn't get to cover here, right? We could be a little bit more informal. We can talk about a little bit more less formal topics and have a little fun chatting, and we'd love to just spend some time with everybody.
Yeah, we got to get Sydney to talk about secrets management. You're going to be there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So see everyone at the after party, and yeah, come join. Bring your favorite drink.